Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today in the show, we're going to talk about the Timberwolves' potential rotation tonight against the Indiana Pacers. Karl-Anthony Towns is out due to knee soreness. TJ Warren, though, has signed his 10-day contract. Could he see rotation minutes in this game? And also some other rotation questions based on the post-trade deadline lineup, Monte Morris in the rotation. How has the three big lineup been working? We'll talk about all that. We'll also do a full preview of Wolves Pacers here tonight. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. Wolves have had the last couple of days off, so good to get back on the court. Of course, the front end of a road back-to-back as the Wolves embark on I think it's a five-game road trip here. After the 7-game homestand to come out of the All-Star break. A lot to get to here today. First off the top here, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You could also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, more great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. You can download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today. Again, both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And of course, you could also follow on X. It's at Locked On T-Wolves and also at B Beacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, lots to get to here today. The big news, of course, on Wednesday is that Karl-Anthony Towns was actually ruled out on Wednesday for Thursday night's game against the Pacers due to knee soreness. Now, he did miss a game back in December. It was the Kings game right before Christmas. He missed that game due to knee soreness, and it was just the one game. And he had apparently tweaked it, a game or two before that. I remember that being a clear, it was an obvious injury at the time that he just missed one game for. Clearly, it's still bothering him, and undoubtedly this has something to do with it being the front end of a back-to-back. Get him a full 3 days off, right? The Wolves played a back-to-backs Sunday, Monday. So he's off Tuesday, Wednesday, and now Thursday. And hopefully he can come back on Friday in Cleveland, which is a nationally televised game Friday night in Cleveland on ESPN. So no Karl-Anthony Towns on Thursday. The Wolves did officially announce the TJ Warren signing. I spent the first segment on Wednesday's show. So if you missed that, go back and check it out. By the way, the episode before this in your feed is the Minnesota basketball party here at the Locked On Wolves feed. I was actually not on that show Wednesday, but I usually am. And then the one before that was the regular Locked On Wolves show on Wednesday. I spent a whole segment talking about TJ Warren and what I think he brings to the table, why I think the Wolves chose him over, say, a Marcus Morris or anyone else for that matter. And he may get thrown into the fire here. He may get a chance to play Thursday night. I'm not convinced he will, and I'm also not convinced if he does. I don't think he'll play heavy minutes. The Wolves already have some front court depth. The issue is if you're missing two guys, right? Like if Rudy gets into quick foul trouble or if, God forbid somebody tweaks something in the game on Thursday, they needed another guy, right? Like at least in terms of filling the roster, it made sense to have somebody else that could play that role. And TJ Warren is essentially the same role as a Marcus Morris in that he could play the 3 and the 4, but he's a little bit more positionally versatile. He can give you a little more off the dribble if you need that scoring punch. And at times the Wolves bench does, right? They never got the version of Shake Milton that they wanted. Monte Morris can score, but he's not going to hunt his own shot. So to have somebody else that can score a little bit, if you need it, is nice. But like I said, I also think he's a little bit more versatile defensively. And this is the sort of game where that could come in handy. Now, TJ Warren hasn't played all year in any, like he hasn't been to the G League. He just hasn't been playing since last year when he played for the Nets and was traded to the Suns. So I don't know like what kind of playing shape he's in. He just signed. He's had probably one practice with the team. But the Pacers played at a fast pace. So we'll talk more about that later. The Pacers aren't a huge team. So it is the sort of team that you could see TJ Warren getting a little bit more run and maybe a little bit less of Kyle Anderson, for instance. I think in my mind that makes just as much sense as any of the matchups, right? In fact, makes more sense than the Cleveland game on Friday, right? Cleveland's a big, now they don't have Evan Mobley. We'll talk, of course, more about that on Friday. But if Warren's going to play on the road trip, like this is actually one of those games where it makes sense, right? Outside of Miles Turner, they don't. It's not a big team. Like Obi Toppin's a rotation guy, Jalen Smith's a rotation guy, but like this isn't a massive lineup. So you could get away with some TJ Warren minutes if you want to be a little bit quicker, a little bit more versatile on the perimeter. You want to have a little bit more shooting. He's your option, and we'll see like what this turns into and what he's got in the tank. Like he was a fringe rotation guy last year for the Suns late in the season, but hasn't really been like good since 2021, since he had that foot injury, as we talked about Wednesday. But there's a chance he eats into some Kyle Anderson minutes as we move. Now, it's only a 10-day deal, but there's a chance he eats into some Kyle Anderson minutes that gives you some flexibility, which was kind of what I said when they signed Justin Jackson a couple weeks ago. It gives you an option. If Slow-Mo doesn't have it, now he's been playing much better of late, but if he doesn't have it, if you need more of the scoring punch, less of the playmaking, and less of the length and defense, then TJ Warren gives you that option. And the Pacers matchup could be one where we do see TJ Warren. Now, the last couple of games that Karl-Anthony Towns has missed, of course, the Wolves may do without somebody in this role. So the most recent one was that Spurs game just a couple of weeks ago when Cat missed it due to personal reasons. And of course, Kyle Anderson got the start. I would expect that on Thursday in Indianapolis as well. Slow-Mo only played 15 minutes in that game, and Naz ended up playing 33 minutes off the bench and having a massive game, 22 points on 10 shots, 6 boards for Naz in that game against the Spurs, and the Wolves ended up holding on, winning by 9. So that became more of a Naz Reid game. The time before that, Cats only missed 2 games this year. That one due to personal reasons, and then the one back in late December due to the sore knee, and that was a win at the Kings. The Wolves have won both games that Cats missed. They beat the Kings by 12 in Sacramento, and that was a couple of days before Christmas. And Kyle Anderson, of course, started that game as well. And I would anticipate he does on Thursday again. He played 28 minutes, had 10, 5, and 5. Nice game. Naz only played 19 minutes off the bench. So that was one of the few kind of first half of the season games where Slow-Mo looked like Slow-Mo from last year. And, that version of Slow-Mo is going to get to stay on the floor for sure. So I would anticipate Kyle Anderson starting the game, but if he doesn't have it, or if this game becomes a faster paced game, which it will because it's the Pacers, you very well could see some TJ Warren rotation minutes, certainly more Naz Reid. Naz loves to play at a fast pace, and Naz Rudy lineups have actually been really good defensively. We're actually going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But having Naz is such a luxury. When you miss Karl-Anthony Towns, to be able to say, okay, we're going to plug in Kyle Anderson and give us what we need, enough and run our offense through Anthony Edwards and to a lesser extent, Rudy Gobert. And then we're going to come in with Naz like we always do, but we can choose to play him heavier minutes if we need to. And in this case, the Wolves probably will against a smaller, faster paced team. Naz gives you also need more scoring with Cat missing. You're not going to ask TJ Warren to come in and score 16 points for you in this game. So you're going to lean on Naz to give you some of that punch from the front court off the bench. It's just, like I said, just such a luxury. All right. I want to talk a little bit about some lineup data before we get to the Pacers preview. I want to talk about the multi-point guard lineups, the multi-center, and by that I mean 3 center lineups, and also some Monte Morris minutes overall, what some of his best and worst pairings are since joining the Wolves. And then we will get to a more in-depth Wolves Pacers preview here at the end of the show. So all that is coming up here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. You could also choose the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It's also part of Nissan's incredible lineup. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right. Rotation lineup data. A couple different directions I want to go with this, and we could let's start with Monte Morris, since he isn't on the injury report Thursday. The 3-center thing is less relevant immediately because I still want to talk about it, but because Cat's not playing Thursday night, it becomes a little bit less relevant than the Monte Morris lineup. So let's start there. So Monte Morris, since he's been with the Wolves. Oh, by the way, I also want to talk Kyle Anderson. I didn't mention that before, but because he's going to be in the starting lineup and has been more recently due to some here or there missed games from Rudy and Cat, I want to talk about slow-mo minutes too. But Monte Morris, by and large, has been awesome with the Wolves since he's been with the team, right? When Monte Morris is on the court, the Timberwolves are a plus 7.2. He's got a plus 7.2 on-off right now. Or actually, more accurately, the lineups when Monte Morris is on the floor have been a plus 7.2. Offensively has been a bit so-so, 37th percentile according to Cleaning the Glass, 113.6 points per 100 possessions. But defensively have been fantastic. And you've no doubt noticed his on-ball defense has been awesome. He's had some, like you could clip off, I don't know, a couple dozen of these ISO possessions where he's just moving his feet, staying in front of guys. Remember, this is somebody who missed a huge chunk of the season with the quadriceps injury. He played in like 6 games with the Pistons before being traded to Minnesota. So he wasn't even necessarily in great game shape. He didn't have all his conditioning, but defensively, he's been really impressive. And he's got decent size for a point guard, but we're not talking about, he's not Nickeil Alexander-Walker out there, right? But fighting through screens, moving his feet, it's reminiscent of Mike Conley in a way, but younger and with a bit more juice. And he's done that. I mean, like, been really good on the ball. Defensive lineups with him on the floor, they're 97th percentile, 106.4 points per 100 possessions, and 97th percentile in opponent effective field goal percentage, which is really, really great to see. On the negative side of things, the two point guard lineups that Chris Finch has tried alongside Mike Conley have not been successful. In fact, the offense, surprisingly enough, with the two of them on the floor, has been awful. Now we're talking 77 possessions, still a very small sample size, but we've seen it now. I don't know. I mean, how many games has he played in a Wolves uniform? I've got it right here. Well, actually, no, I don't have it that handy, but what, a dozen or so, maybe 18, 16 games in a Timberwolves uniform. Actually, no, I do have it right here. I might as well look at the actual number. Let's see. 10 games. Less than I thought. Okay, so 10 games, 77 possessions in a Timberwolves uniform for Monte Morris. And, or I should say 77 possessions with Mike Conley. And it's a negative 15.6 point differential with Conley and Morris on the floor together. Offensively, just 90.9 points per 100 possessions. That's 0 percentile, according to Cleaning the Glass. The defense on the flip side, still 97th percentile, the same as all Monte Morris minutes, allowing just 106.5 points per 100 possessions. I'm sure Chris Finch is going to keep trying it. And as I always, kind of the caveat I always add to some of this lineup data is it very much depends on matchups. I just implore Chris Finch to deploy this lineup judiciously, right? Like, you've got depth on the wing otherwise, so unless the situation really calls for it, there's really no reason for it. Now, we've also seen him do it with Jordan McLaughlin. McLaughlin missed the last game due to illness, and he's questionable for Thursday's game against the Pacers due to illness. That also hasn't worked. Morris and McLaughlin have only played 16 possessions together, and they're a negative 81.3 points per 100 possessions in terms of their differential. 0 percentile both ends of the floor. in 16 possessions. So it really couldn't have gone any worse. I think they've scored like one basket, if I'm not mistaken, in those 16 possessions overall. So, super noisy. Like that doesn't really tell us anything, except for that 2 point guard lineups could probably be deployed a bit more judiciously by Chris Finch at this point in time. Now, Monte Morris overall, again, the numbers are really positive. So flipping back to that, like, how's he looked with the bench unit? Well, in lineups with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which we saw Na playing a lot of essentially backup point guard earlier this year when McLaughlin was out, and then when McLaughlin was struggling, Alexander-Walker was effectively the backup point guard. Well, they've already played, Morris and Alexander-Walker played 175 possessions together, and they're 99th percentile overall, a plus 20.6 net rating in those 175 possessions, 95th percentile offense, 99th percentile defense. It's been phenomenal. And it's with you can intermix everybody else. Like their best lineup is with, their most used lineup, which is also like their third best lineup, is with Nas and Kyle Anderson and Ant all on the floor, with essentially Alexander Walker at the 3, which we don't see a ton of. Their best lineups actually also with him at the 3, with Ant and with Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert. So it doesn't really matter what the front court pairing is or whether or not Ant's on the floor. When Monte Morris and Nickeil Alexander-Walker have been on the floor together, they've been awesome. And Monte Morris and Anthony Edwards, not much different. 99th percentile, plus 17.6 net rating, so about 3 points less. But they're 100th percentile on defense, only 72nd on offense, but still positive, right? Moral of the story is Monte Morris, other than the 2 point guard lineups, has been awesome in a Timberwolves uniform so far. And his minutes have been all over the map. I mean, I mentioned that Spurs game when Karl-Anthony Towns didn't play earlier. When I was looking at that game, he played 27 minutes in that game. And I mean, Conley only played 19 and he had 16 points in that game. So it was an effective, point guard game for the Wolves. And maybe I don't recall exactly, but maybe that's one of those times when Finch tried those two on the floor together a bit more because they both had good games. But even though the Monte Morris numbers aren't sexy yet, and he's missed a lot of shots, to the naked eye, you watch a game and if you're just looking at box scores, I should say, you wouldn't be saying, oh, Monte Morris has had a super positive impact on this team. But he has. I mean, shooting wise, he's under 40% as a Timberwolf. He's 36% from 3, 37.5% overall from the floor if you're just looking at raw field goal percentage. So if you're box score watching, you'd say, yeah, that acquisition hasn't done a whole lot. But all the numbers, the net rating, all the lineup data suggests that he's been a really positive impact on the Wolves. And defensively, the eye test should tell you that he's been fantastic. Real quickly, let's talk a little bit about slow-mo. Obviously, a point of contention for Wolves fans here so far this year, because I want to talk about him specifically because he's been starting a little bit more lately due to a couple of guys being injured, right? Due to Cat missing a game recently, missing again on Thursday. Rudy missed a game in there. So Kyle Anderson's he'll probably pick up his 5th start of the season here on Thursday night. And he's progressively played better. And again, the lineup data is positive. Him and Rudy together are a plus 6.7 net rating. And that's likely your starting front court on Thursday in Indiana. Their best lineup together is a 99th percentile 5-man lineup. And that is actually slow-mo at the 3, which shocked me because we just haven't seen much success with slow-mo at the 3 this season. It's obviously that was one of the question marks coming into the season. And I would argue part of the reason he struggled is he's being asked to play the 3 more because Nas obviously is going to get more minutes. You have Nas, Rudy, Cat. Those guys are always playing the 4 and the 5, nearly always. So his best lineup is Ant, Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the backcourt, and then slow-mo, Nas, and Rudy in the front court. It's a plus 35 net rating in 183 possessions. So it's both his most used and his best lineup. It's a 96th percentile defense, which shouldn't be surprising at all. It's actually an 89th percentile offensive unit, with Ant essentially being the straw that stirs the drink. Alexander Walker, Nas spotted up on the perimeter. Nas can cut, slash to the rim, take those dribble handoffs and get to his right hand, get to the bucket. Rudy doing Rudy things. That unit has a really high offensive rebound rate. Now, his second most used lineup is also one of his worst lineups. And that's actually with him at the 4, along with Jaden McDaniels, Conley, Edwards, and Gobert. So what's very likely to be the starting lineup on Thursday night has actually really struggled as a unit. a minus 13 net rating in 132 possessions, and it is his second most used lineup. So I still think, because Chris Finch, I just don't see him rocking the boat here. I would expect Kyle Anderson to start Thursday night against the Pacers, but that lineup has not been successful in 132 possessions, which is not nothing. I mean, it's still a relatively small sample, but it's not nothing. They've been really bad on offense and mediocre on defense, 57th percentile. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, the Pacers matchup I don't think is a great one for Kyle Anderson. So is there a possibility that we see a different look? I really kind of doubt Naz Reid's going to be in the starting lineup. That's just not, I mean, the Wolves haven't done that at all this year. Why rock the boat? Like I said, keep the six-man in his six-man role. Does TJ Warren start in his first game in Wolves uniform? Probably not. So I think we're still going to see Kyle Anderson start. I just don't know. It could be more like that Spurs game when Slow-Mo started but played only 15 minutes. The matchup just isn't great. I think Naz will be better in this particular matchup, and you may see some TJ Warren. But that Kyle Anderson lineup data is interesting. That he's actually been, his best lineup is with him at the 3, and his worst frequently used lineup is with him at the 4. All right, last thing real quick on lineups. The 3 big lineup that we saw quite a bit of a couple games ago. Was it I don't think it was the Clippers game. I think it was the game before that. I'm blanking on who they lost to last Friday. Overtime game. Kings, I think it was. The 3 big lineup we're not going to see Thursday with Cat out, but it's now played. Gobert, Towns, and Naz Reid together have played 48 possessions. So we're starting to get a little bit more of a sample. And it's a 100th percentile lineup with Cat, Naz, and Rudy on the floor together. The most used lineup with those 3 on the floor is 21 possessions, and it's a plus 5.4. But all of them together, the 48 possessions, 100th percentile, 99th percentile on offense, and 100th percentile on defense as a 3-man unit. So more of that, please. More Cat, Naz, and Rudy on the floor together. Obviously dependent on matchups, but it's just something I like to pop in on every couple of weeks. We're starting to get a bit more of a sample, and I'm very curious to see how much more would they try that here over the last month of the regular season. All right, let's get into the Wolves-Pacers matchup here next. That's how we'll close the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I attend all kinds of shows. I love, obviously, going to sporting events of all kinds, comedy shows. Recently, we wanted to go see a musical, and, kind of last minute. I'm not always last minute. Sometimes I am. And Game Time can help you come through, and it did in that instance. Last minute to get tickets to a musical, everything's on there. It's fantastic. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you do arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out, and you can buy your tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Game Time, put simply, is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Wolves are taking on the Pacers on Thursday night in Indianapolis after a couple of days off. No Karl-Anthony Towns. The Pacers most recently defeated the Dallas Mavericks by 17 earlier this week in a game that Luka had a triple-double in. Just really quickly, more big picture on the Pacers. The Wolves last saw them in December, a long time ago. That was, of course, pre-Pascal Siakam trade. So at the time, Bruce Brown was in the rotation, or actually a member of the starting lineup the last time the Wolves saw the Pacers. Since the Siakam trade in January, the Pacers are actually just 11-10. So they're pretty much keeping pace with what they were doing prior to the trade. Siakam's been great. He's scoring more efficiently than he ever really has in his career. Of course, a nice two-way player to have. But again, functionally, the team, from a record standpoint, hasn't been much better. You look at the last 2 weeks, the data on cleaning the glass, the offense and defense kind of are where they have been all season. One of the league's very best offenses. They play at such a high pace, which is a big reason why Siakam has been so efficient offensively for them. And their defense has been one of the league's worst all season long. That hasn't changed. So you look at the overall season numbers, and the Pacers are number 2 in offensive efficiency next to Boston, and they are number 27 in defensive efficiency, with the only teams worse than them, the 3 worst teams in the NBA, basically. Washington, Detroit, and Charlotte are the only 3 teams that have been worse defensively. And the Pacers only have a 10th of a point. They're only a 10th of a point better in defensive rating at cleaning the glass against Charlotte. So for as awesome as they've been offensively, they've been terrible defensively. But because they've been so dominant offensively, they actually, point differential wise, the Pacers are actually I guess they're down to 15th in the league. So they're middle of the pack, which I guess you'd expect, right? A top 5 offense, bottom 5 defense. Record wise, they're 35-28. So they're in a pretty good spot overall, considering how bad they've been defensively. The Wolves, by the way, are still second in net rating league wide. They maintain that spot over the Thunder. And then there's nearly a 2-point gap between the Thunder and Clippers. For whatever that's worth, just putting that out there, side point, for as much as everyone wants to talk about Denver and the Clippers. I mean, Denver's been much better since the All-Star break. They were down to like 12th in net rating. Now they're up to 6. So to be clear, Denver's been awesome since the All-Star break. I think they're 6-1 since the break. But overall, it's Boston, huge drop, the Wolves and Thunder in their own tier, and then a smaller, 2-point drop. Then it's the Clippers, Pelicans, who are very scary at number 5, and then the Nuggets, and then Cleveland, who we'll see on Friday in terms of net rating. Anyway, so this Pacers matchup, talked about this already kind of in passing multiple times. They play extremely fast. They're second in pace league-wide. It drives that offensive rating. They actually are middle of the pack in terms of three-point rate. They're 15th in the league in three-point attempt rate, but they're 6th in percentage. Of course, the Wolves are second, so we should see some impressive marksmanship in this game. The last time these teams faced off, the Wolves shot 18 of 30 from outside the arc, 60% back in December. Ant went 7 of 10. That was a game that Cat had 40 points in, and Ant had 37. Nas had 17 off the bench, so it was the Wolves stars plus Nas, and then nobody else scored more than 11 points. A bunch of guys made threes. They had 3 players with more than 3 threes, including Nas, and also Troy Brown Jr. off the bench, had 11 points, made 3 threes in that game for the Wolves. The Pacers shot the ball horribly. They got out in transition, beat the Wolves in fast break points handily, as you'd expect. Of course, that's been a hot button topic lately for the Wolves. But the Pacers won fast break points in that game 16-2. They only shot 6 of 21, though, from outside the arc, and the Wolves forced 13 turnovers. And despite it being a high-scoring 127-109 final, the Wolves held on and won on the strength of a strong defensive first quarter and then a dominant overall third quarter for Minnesota in that game, outscoring Indiana 38-23 in the third quarter of that last matchup. Again, big games for Ant and Cat. I should also say, I should have said this earlier, Tyrese Haliburton did not play in that game. That was also, remember, the Pacers had mechanical issues with their play, and they got in the same day as the game, and it didn't really catch up to them till the third quarter. So this is a difficult matchup for Minnesota because the Wolves are such a good half-court defense, obviously the league's best by far. The transition defense, the body of work has been good this year. It has not been good of late. It was much better on Monday against Portland, but it was horrible in those 2 losses last Friday and Sunday. So that's a concern. I think the Wolves are only favored by 2.5 points on FanDuel on the road in Indiana in this game with a couple days rest, but with no Cat. And again, the matchup is not great for Minnesota. Minnesota rather slow the game down and play in the half court, force teams to shoot mid-range jumpers, dictate terms. But the Pacers are number 1 in effective field goal percentage in the league. They get the shots that they want. Now, they don't get to the line a ton. So if the Wolves can just get back in transition, run them off the line, and avoid fouling, this is a game they should win. Certainly. There's a reason they're favored, even though it's only by a couple, 2.5 points. But even without Cat, it's a winnable game for Minnesota. It's just not an easy game. The Pacers are a really good offensive team, and they play really fast. And them being poor defensively, like, it could be a big Ant game, but if he gets tunnel vision and plays iso ball too much without Karl-Anthony Towns as another option, hopefully Nas Reed has a good game. You could see a big Nas game off the bench because, again, I think he's simply a better matchup for this Pacers team than Kyle Anderson is. And if the Wolves can successfully, I don't know that you're going to be able to slow the game down. The Pacers are going to run no matter what, so it's going to be hard to truly dictate pace. The Wolves can play fast if they need to, and Nas could be a big part of that if that's what ends up happening. Now, you want to be careful. You don't want to get into a complete track meet, but just knowing that there's going to be more possessions overall in this game, I think Nas is a better rotation fit. We might see more of him off the bench in this one versus Kyle Anderson, who I still think will get the start, as I said earlier, but could be a big Nas game. All right, we'll have the live postcast following the game. I believe it'll be Jack Borman joining Luke Inman to talk Wolves Pacers. All of the postgame pod on Friday. We'll take a peek at Friday night's game against the Cavs, who we have not seen, a shorthanded Cavs team that we'll see on Friday. They had a big win over the Celtics on Tuesday, I think it was. So we'll talk a little bit about that Friday after the postgame pod as well. That's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at B-Beacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.